And so I want to welcome everybody here today and thank you for coming and participating on our webinar today. We hope that we can bring you some enlightening and hopefully informative information that will be something you can take back and use and help you in your day-to-day life. I am Patty Sykstus. I'm the president of Not One More Alabama, one of the co-founders. And I am here today as your moderator. And so I'll be kind of helping to move this webinar forward, but the stars of the show today are Jack and Maggie, and I'm going to have them come on in just a minute and talk to you a little bit more about who they are. I do want to thank the Addiction Prevention Coalition, who has done the work behind this webinar to make this happen. We have recently been working with the Addiction Prevention Coalition and the Drug Education Council of Mobile, who is also a collaborator on this, on a number of projects. And we love this collaboration because Not One More Alabama is mostly up in North Alabama. The APC is focused on Central Alabama, and the Drug Education Council of Mobile, obviously down in South Alabama. And we just absolutely love the idea that we're bringing this message from one end of the state to the next and helping to educate everybody in the state of Alabama. So today we're going to be talking about grief and substance use disorders. We will have a chat box. We have a lot of things we're going to try to cover, and so we'll try to get to questions as they come and maybe work them into some of the things that we're already talking about. If we don't get to your questions, then we will be talking about the workshop that we'll be having this weekend, and hopefully that would give you another opportunity to do that. So feel free to chat and let us know anything that you need a little bit more information about. So we're going to get started, and I think the best way to get started is to introduce Jack and Maggie and let you know a little bit more about them. And I think the best way for them to be introduced is to let them just tell you a little bit about them. You'll get tired of my voice, so I'm going to let you hear their voices. So Maggie, why don't we start with you and just tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up here today. How did you get into this area of work?
I'm Maggie Banger, and I'm a private practice therapist in Hoover, Alabama, which is in a suburb of Birmingham. I've always been interested in death and dying. It's just something that has been a beautiful concept to me spiritually throughout my life. And so I went and got my counseling degree, initially thinking that I would work in a long-term care unit or a graduated community for older adults. But I was very much drawn to the field of substance use. I have a lot of people in my family who have substance use issues, as well as a lot of friends of mine that I was very close to. And so when I was doing my grad school work, I dove into substance use, and I began working in that field. And then after that training, I began working at a local large institution and began researching and doing their grief program there, which I did for about 3 years or around that time period. And from that point in time, I got certified by the Grief Recovery Institute, and I have kept on studying throughout with grief and also with addiction prevention, disease concept modalities, multiple different kinds of modalities of recovery, and infusing those all together to help people walk through not only just death, but the losses that come throughout our lives, period. And so 3 years ago, I left that institution to form my private practice, and that's where I am and what I do.
Thanks, Maggie. I appreciate that. Jack, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got into this area of work?
I will. Hey, everyone. My name is Jack Sykstus. For those of you that are keen listeners, you will hear a similar last name to the moderator, and I am her son. And so I'm grateful to be here, and my background has been pretty heavy on the substance use addiction recovery side, but I really kind of got into this field for several reasons. I mean, a lot of it is I just experienced a lot of loss and grief early on in my life, and almost a decade ago I went through Maggie's grief program, also in rehab, right? So kind of mixing and marrying the addiction and loss worlds together. And I found just a tremendous amount of healing through going through Maggie's program. Maggie, I know you know that, as well as just focusing on like, how do you live this life well, trying to be a person in long-term recovery, right? What does that look like? And that is not easy, right? And so I've really come to appreciate like the healing that has to happen. And part of that journey has been able to give back. I remember like going through treatment and saying like, that's an awesome job to like talk to people and figure out like, hey, there's a lot of chaos in your world, let's sort through it. I really liked that. I was like, I can do that, you know? So I ended up in doing family therapy, clinical degree, and worked primarily in substance use. Through the Grief Recovery Institution. And we do a lot of research. I do a lot of tech-based interventions with them, really focusing on trying to reach as many people as possible, and especially working primarily with families, right? How can we support families? We know that families being a part of a loved one's treatment process, recovery, leads to better outcomes. And I've always been, I do a lot of couples work too. And, you know, sometimes I think all the time about like, there's strength in the relationship I have with you, right? I can either get mad at you and frustrated with you, or I can lean on you and navigate this world together. And through loss, we see the same thing, right? Is that I can work with you through this rather than working against you or in isolated camps, right? So I do a lot of kind of just relational, how can we use the relationships and the interactions we have to support one another through loss, through recovery, through treatment, through addiction. We have one another. So that's kind of the primary focus of my work. I also have a small little private practice that I do on the side. I do a lot of different things, but those are kind of my primary. And it's been cool because I get to kind of be actively a part of a research community, right? And really seeing like, what are the trends out there and how are we kind of combating those trends? And then also being mindful of like, you know, one of the unfortunate causes of not just the opioid epidemic, but of the substance use epidemic is we lose a lot of people as a result of it, right? I would say every day when I work on the helpline, I would say at least 2 people are reaching out with recent loss, right? And wanting to share that story and to have that heard. And so it's been very helpful and meaningful to be a part of this work. So that is a brief intro of kind of what I do. And I look forward to being here today.
Well, Jack, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we're just going to kind of dig right in. And I've got a whole list of questions and we'll use some of these. But my goal with this is that we're just having a conversation today. So not an interrogation. So let's just chat and talk a little bit about some of these topics. And I think kind of to maybe get the ball rolling is let's just talk about what's the difference between grief and loss? You hear those words used a lot interchangeably, grief and loss. And are they? Do they mean the same thing? When you hear grief, somebody's grieving something, when you hear the word loss, or do they mean the same thing or do they have different meanings?
I'll take a stab at that first, if you're good with that, Jack.
Yep.
To me, the loss is actually whatever is gone, whatever has changed. Grieving is the process that we go through, the emotional process of anything that has had a significant change. So any type of relationship or bond that has had any significant kind of physical change or other change within our lives, grief is the process that we go through with that. And so a loss prompts a grieving process.
That's excellent. Okay, very good. I think that's just a good base because I know just as a person who doesn't have as much knowledge in this area, I hear those words used a lot interchangeably. So I think that helps just kind of set the foundation for our conversation today. Okay, so when we talk about grief or grief around that loss, not just necessarily the death of a loved one, but any kind of grieving from a loss. Can you explain what some of maybe those other losses are that people might experience related to substance use disorder, other than just the loss of their loved ones? But what other kind of losses might we be talking about?
Yeah, I'll jump on that, Maggie. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll kind of start with just like the more there's a general answer, right? And then there's one kind of specific to substance use. I think we can always break loss down to the easy ones are the tangibles, right? I lost a person, a place, maybe a thing, right? And I know that that thing was here yesterday or here in my life a week ago, and it's no longer here. Another kind of feature is that I'm starting to know absence, right? I know that I miss the sounds of my loved one coming down the stairs in the morning. I miss or I saw their name in my phone, and I know that if I call, they don't answer, right? We're noting absence, right? That's another feature of loss. But then there's the intangibles, and it's hard to kind of like really name the intangibles because they're so personal to you, right? That might be a loss of my self-worth, right? It might be a loss of what I had hoped to be as a person, right? It might be a loss of the expectations that I had of you. There's lots of very intangible losses that I think take a little bit of time. Once we acknowledge that the tangible is gone, all those other losses start coming up, right? And those losses can be really small. They happen in a moment sometimes.
Yes.
They can be really large. But I think for substance use specifically, especially if we're looking at parents, loved ones of any type, right, is that there tends to be a loss of the person that you know. And as of my work with parents, there's a common statement of like, I know who my child or I know who my partner is, and they're not that person today, right? And so there's a loss, even though they're still here, right? I've lost the person that I love. I lost the person that I know or I expect them to be, right? With substance use, there's also a very common one of loss of safety. Your loved one's living with you, stealing, right? Maybe there's some lying going on, all very common and normal symptoms of substance use. Yet it makes me feel a little unsafe in my house. I don't feel comfortable leaving my belongings in their normal spots, right? Now I'm having to hide things from my loved one. Now we're in an unsafe relationship and I miss the safety that I had with you. So we can look at the tangible losses, but those intangibles are very personal, but they're very real. And they have a very real impact on our behaviors and the way we feel about people, places, and things. So Maggie, is there anything else you would add to that?
Well, I want to add the personal dimension to that of the person who is the one struggling with their addictive disease. And it's not just the family system that is having the grief that's going alongside of losses. The addict, the alcoholic themselves, they've lost themselves. They've lost their hopes. They've lost their dreams. They've lost their family. They've lost their friends. And then when they are in pursuit of recovery, they have lost their solution, even though it didn't work for them. And so there is a lot of work to be done on grief and loss within the addictive disease process internally for the addict alcoholic and within the family system unit as well. So I don't want for us to forget the importance of the healing internally of every person involved.
Yep. I love that, Maggie. And I think sometimes when we talk about substance use, we forget about the compassion that we have to hold and make space for that person struggling. And there is so much internal angst, right? And I always call it a torment. There's a few adolescents that I meet with and they're like, no, I love using substance and that's not going to change, right? We might call that pre-contemplative, but that's fine, right? They're young. But it is very rare when I don't meet somebody that has that torment. I have lost so much in my life and I have a solution. It's not the best solution, but it's one that I can depend on. I have a loss of safety that I experience on a daily basis because I don't know where my next fix is going to come from, right? And so, I love adding that, that personal dimension, the compassionate dimension to the person that's struggling, as well as the family system that's kind of encompassing. There's loss every which way that we're talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's excellent, you guys. That wonderful, wonderful explanation of all those other types of losses. Okay, so why would we specifically want to deal with grief related to substance use disorders and have that conversation independent of just grief in general? Like, what makes the grief that is specific to substance use disorder unique from grief of all types? You know, I've worked with a lot of people or spent time with a lot of people that have lost loved ones to substance use disorder. And my observation is that it's very different. It's very different when you lose somebody to an overdose or even just long-term complications, or maybe an accident related to, or any possible way, but related to their use, versus somebody who died of natural causes, or somebody who maybe died in a way that had nothing to do with substances. So why is that different, and what do we need to know about that?
Jack, I'll take a stab at that first, and then please follow up with me.
Sounds great.
Okay. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is that it's always something that we fear, but we don't really expect when a death occurs. The other thing for me is there is a lot of unknown and unresolved that goes into this process, because it is not something where you've had a long life and people have had this ability to talk with things and plan with you and go through meaningful experiences many times. So there has been a lot of times isolation from the person who's using in emotional or physical ways. A lot of times, especially with an overdose, it is not known if it was purposeful or accidental. And so there is this unknown that goes along with that piece as well. There's a lot more anger. There's a lot more just complete, I don't know how to say this, especially with a parent. There is a level of brokenness when loss is out of order within chronological time, that it doesn't matter how old the child is. The word I use is rent. It is something that rents the soul to a deep place. And people do not know what to say to people and how to behave around them. And so it creates this isolative bubble. And then there's all those intangibles still that Jack was alluding to just a minute ago that add on top and inside and swirl around all of this within that bubble. And learning how to allow somebody in there with you is the most important thing that people can do. Jack, where were you headed with that? I'll just stop talking because I could go on for a long time.
Yeah. Man, Maggie, you should just have a one-person show today. The only thing I would add, and I was kind of thinking about, like, you know, when we're doing our webinar this upcoming weekend, you know, part of what we're also going to talk about is stigma, which is a lot of what helps, you know, create that vacuum that you're in, that isolating bubble. And I think about how much, and we'll go more into depth on this on Saturday, it's just how much stigma impacts our behavior and how we talk about something, think about something, feel about something, right? And we know, and I'm kind of like sitting here reflecting as we go through our own loss right now, is how like supportive I can talk to anybody about what's going on with my grandmother and currently today, right? No real stigma to it, right? It's unfortunate, it's sad, there's emotion attached to it, but I got a community. I got a lot of support. I remember when my buddy Kyle died, it was all in hushed tones, right, behind closed doors that we would talk. I remember we went to his memorial really small, right? We didn't want to, because we don't want people talking about it, right? We don't want people, you know, gossiping. And that was really his family that was making those decisions in those moments. And it's just, you know, stigma is so pervasive, and it changes the way that we feel like that we can honor the people that we love, because they died one way and not the other way, that now I have to change how I'm going to approach this and change who I can lean on. It might be that I don't feel like I can lean on anyone, right? Even my partner, we might have been going through this forever, and we're at this moment, this finality, and we start thinking, I should have done something different. I could have done something different. You know, I would have. We should have started looking for all those signs that we missed. We should have intervened. So now we're not able to lean on each other because we're stuck in our own shame that we're navigating. And then I also think, let's just think about our research, right? We know that the average age of life went down the past 2 years for the single reason of opioid epidemic, right? We also look at the CDC, that it just overtook heart disease, fatality from all substance use. Let's get out of the opioid epidemic. We look at
Yes.
stimulant overdose as
Yes.
well, right? So being mindful that I can go at anybody and talk about heart disease, but we have something else that is taking more lives on a annual basis than heart disease, but we're not willing to talk about it. So I do hope that, these conversations, these webinars, what we're doing, helps you just feel comfortable. It's like, it's okay to honor your loved one. You know that person. They were a
Yes.
beautiful individual. You know exactly who they are, who they were, and who they continue to be. And
Yes.
so giving yourself permission to honor them in a way and not let stigma dictate how you should honor their memories. So it's kind of my answer to that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's to me, and one of the important things that we try to do with Not One More Alabama is to give people a place to do that. We think it's really important to just have those conversations and be able to talk out loud about it and say,
Yes.
we have every year a beautiful, just exquisite angel tree that's part of the Huntsville Tinsel Trail. And we had 52 beautiful faces of lives that were people's loved ones, their family members, that were on that tree. And we had it right in the middle of the park. Like, you couldn't enter the park without walking past that angel tree. And we had floodlight shining up on it, and you could see it from a distance, and you wanted to know what it was. And we loved that we were making that front and center. This gave those families a place to be able to come in and say, that was my loved one. And they could talk about what happened, and it gave them a safe place to do that. So I think that stigma is one of the biggest barriers, just from my observation. I'm not a clinician, but for people being willing to come out and talk, it's difficult. It's a hard thing to do. Okay, so let's kind of continue our conversation with it's like, how does grief show up? Like, how do we know somebody is experiencing grief physically, emotionally? Are there some signs that we can look for? I'm always wanting to know, as a friend or as a loved one, how can I support somebody, and how do I know? A lot of times people aren't going to come out and just say what's happening. So what can I be looking for? What emotional things, physical things, signs that there's grief in process?
Truthfully, they look like everything else. And so many times we misdiagnose and we mistreat all of these things. So physically, we're going to have, if we're going through a depressive episode because of these things, there's going to be a weightiness to our limbs. There's going to be a heaviness within the core of our body, in the chest. There's going to be, you're going to feel like your eye sockets are extremely heavy, or somebody's pushing on them. There can be a lot of headaches. There can be high blood pressure because we are eating and stuffing our emotions inside and not verbalizing them and getting them up and out of our body. And so that creates a lot of anxiety, high blood pressure, ulcers, just gastrointestinal issues, things like that we would go and have treated by a doc, but the root cause is unresolved emotional grief. Now, the acting out piece may be, I start to eat more, I start to drink more, I start to go on spending binges, I start to begin isolating myself into maybe a more, I call it a fantastical world, but I read all day long and don't talk to anybody or interact with anybody. I'm on the internet all day long, and all I do is scroll through Facebook and click like and not like, and I don't have any real conversations with anybody. I hide in my device. Things of that nature. And so there is an isolative component to that with the emotional state. And so that, to me, may be what might be the most noticeable, is the I pull back. I withdraw from what I would consider any kind of normal interaction, conversation, things shift some. I appear more guarded, more blocked, just very surface level where we might have been able to laugh a lot more. I don't have that. My joy is gone. My facial expressions, my affect is what we call that in the emotional world, is more sullen. It's just down. It's flat. I have a grayness to my skin, tone and color. So that's some things that come up to me right now. Jack, you got any other things that pop up with you?
I was thinking about kind of the second part of that question that you asked. It was just like, thinking about, how can I show up to someone else's grief, right? So there's the first, like, what does it feel like? And it's hard to look at you and just know, unless I really, really know you. And even then I might not know, right? And so I always think that, we have a skill we call an open-ended question. And when I do couples and families work, I always give an example, right? My partner's name is Julia. She'll come into the house and I might be cooking dinner, right? And she just got off of work and I say, how are you doing? Right? And she says, fine, and storms upstairs. Well, the definition of an open-ended question is that you can't answer it in one word, but she just did. So what happened? Right? Well, what was my body language doing? Right? I'm doing something else. She's transitioning from a long day at work. We're not really spending time. But then if I ask the same question, right? She got home, she got in a comfy clothes, sitting down on the couch. I go and sit next to her. I'm attentive, shoulders are open. And say, hey, how are you doing? I'm most likely not going to hear the one-word answer, right? I'm going to hear, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm struggling with. With grief, it's no different, right? Is that if you have an idea someone might be struggling, ask that beautiful open-ended question in an appropriate environment with the appropriate time. Make time, cultivate that moment and say, hey, I've been just thinking about you. I'd love to go and get some lunch, right? You're going to hear about grief during that lunch if it's there, right? But if you just hope to, pass them by in the grocery store and, how you doing? I'm okay. Then you're going to see all those symptoms that Maggie is, just flat affect, superficiality, which is all normal, right? There's 26, 27 people on the call. All of you got some coping skills, and they're going to be in absolute refinement during a period of grief, right? And so it's about being intentional in those conversations and giving people the space to feel safe enough to open up, if you're that person.
And, I think we've taught ourselves really culturally just keep going. We've got things to do. So we become very robotic, and we have forgotten the importance of communal conversation and support and real dialogue, like Jack is speaking about. And so there is a very big difference when I ask you something in an engaging and an intentional way that says to you, that communicates to you, I love you, I care about you, I'm here, and I actually really do want to know the answer to your question. I'm not just saying, hey, and walking by.
Yep, I'm listening.
I'm coming to you, I'm listening. You're important to me. You matter.
I think those are amazing points of conversation. And I do think that it's really difficult for people in any type of grief to know the right words, to come up with the right things to say, to know when to say them, and how to say them. But I think specifically when there's substance use involved, that grief can be even harder because of, like you mentioned, Jack, with stigma. And you don't know, I've seen, just in my own personal story, in our story, people don't know what you know. So they're hesitant to say too much because maybe they think they know something you don't know. And, there's a lot of secrets out there when you get into the world of people using substances. So any other tips for people on how to say, what to say? Is there anything else you want to add before we move on to that? I think it's such an important topic because people really, I think, struggle with what to do and what to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
I think the first and foremost, because this is such a common in our meetings that we have for parents and loved ones, is first off, test people in your life, right? I know you want to keep it in because that's the easy thing to do right now. But the long-term consequence to that is that you feel alone, that you don't feel supported, right? So you have to give yourself permission to test, and don't pick the hardest person in your life, right? That person that you're really scared about. And that's not what I'm saying. Is go find that person that you know that's been with you your whole life and you've just been holding back because it's too scary, you feel too ashamed, you're really struggling, but you know in your heart that this person's been in your life and they've been there for it. Go try them out. Give yourself permission to go and have that conversation and tell them, right? And say, could we, and you can ask them first and say, I need someone to talk to. Let people have the opportunity to be in a part of your life, right? So I think that's our first instinct, right? Is to withdraw, to protect ourselves. It's a normal thing, right? But if you're feeling overloaded, you're feeling all those things that Maggie was kind of, those symptoms that we're talking about, that Maggie's experienced, go talk to somebody. The second, I think, would be, is figure out what story are you comfortable with sharing, right? You might not, and I almost find it's almost impossible in most of your relationships to give everybody 100% honesty. First off, give yourself your 100% honesty. Get comfortable with that story, and then go and identify people and say, I'm going to tell them 80%. They don't need to know everything, right? But figure out, what am I comfortable with? I want to talk to this person. I know I need to push myself a little bit, but what am I comfortable with sharing? And it's okay. They don't need 100%. They just don't, right? So is it 70%? Is it 80%? But find what you're comfortable with, and that's your growth zone, right? I've got a little comfort here, but I'm also pushing myself by being open with it. But it's a huge leap of faith because they might not respond the way that you want them to, right? And so that's why we give ourselves permission to test, to practice, find somebody else. And the last thing is always finding like little allies. And that might be with the, Not One More. That might be Addiction Prevention Coalition. That might be Drug Education Council, right? Finding people in little pockets where allies do exist. That might be going to an Al-Anon meeting, right? Or Smart Recovery Family and Friends online and just putting in the chat on the Zoom call that they have. They got 300 people. Those chat is moving. And you just say, I lost somebody and I'm scared as hell talking. Somebody will send you a private message, I promise you.
Yes.
Right? So.
Yes. And then Jack's talking about from this is my struggle. And so I'm going to come at this from this is happening in your life. And I'm the one you want to talk to, or I'm the one that's around you. Okay. So first off, plain communication 101. When you're with people, actually listen to them. Look at them. Hear what they're saying to you. Read their body language. We all can do that. It's not something that is special to trained therapists or clinicians. It is basic, healthy communication that we get so caught up in our own minds and in our own thought processes that we're either back here rehearsing our history or we are plotting and planning for our future, and we are not in the present moment sitting in it with the people that matter to us or to ourselves. And so the truth is, I don't know anyone that is comfortable at all times discussing death, period. And that means a death that we're prepared for, much less one that we are not, or that is out of the chronological order sequence that we anticipate. So number one, nobody is. Number two, please do not say to somebody, I know how you feel, I lost my blah, blah, blah. Just cut that out of your vocabulary. We've been taught to say that to try and pacify things. What that does to someone who has a loss is stop them from telling you the truth because you just made their loss about you and your story. And we don't mean to do that. We all know in those time periods, the people that are closest to us have the biggest intentions to love and support us as much as they can. But those kind of subtle things for someone who is within that acute grief period, or even longer than that, okay? Because grief changes over time. Your loss is always going to be your loss. And so your grief is going to wax and wane over time. And so time will make this better. Things like that. These are things we've got to look at that we really just don't need to engage. First and foremost, you bring your presence. You bring your heart. You bring your physical body. There are people who need and want hugs. There are people who don't. Do not force yourself on somebody who does not want physical touch. There are people who really do. You need to hug them and hold them. You don't have to say anything at all. You can just be there. You can say, I really am so sorry. And please do not offer to help people just as a line. If you're not going to do it, don't do it. Just say, I'm so sorry. Don't say, if there's anything I can do for you, you go ahead and give me a call anytime, day or night. If you're not going to pick up that phone, don't say that. If you're not going to make yourself available, don't say that. And I know that's very blunt and very plain. But when you're dealing with an acute loss, again, that is another rejection if you do not do those things and they think that you are going to be there because you said so. The other thing is this. When you're in acute loss, you are basically, I just call it the brain fog. It is like this dark cloud has descended over your whole entire head. You can't hear, you can't see, you can't smell, any of that kind of stuff. And so it may be that you need to say, I'm coming by your house today at 4. I'm going to bring this, this, and this. I'll stay if you want me to. Don't ask questions. Don't ask them what they want to eat. Don't ask them what time you can come over. They don't have the energy and the strength to give you a response. Okay? And we can go into that more and more and more on, but I wanted to make sure and address some of those things directly. And we will talk about that more in depth this weekend on Saturday. But a lot of things that we are culturally, especially within the South, trained to say. And I'm sorry for people who are very religious. I'm actually a very religious person. But saying somebody has gone to be with Jesus, even though, or gone to be with God, that may be our religious belief. And some people are going to be okay, and that's going to be comforting. Some people are going to look at you and say, I don't want them to be with Jesus right now. I want them to be with me. And you've shut them down. So just something to be really aware of. And always the go-to is, I really am so sorry. My heart breaks for you.
That is really, really impactful and powerful and such useful words. I know I had to have a conversation not long ago, or I needed to have a conversation not long ago with somebody, and it was a different topic, but it was a hard topic, and I didn't know how to address it. And I kind of steered away from it for fear of saying the wrong thing. And I said that to her. I said, I kind of don't say anything because I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. And she said, as long as your heart is in the right place and as long as your motives and your intentions are good, you really can't say the wrong thing, because I'll know that you're trying to say the right thing, even if the words don't come out perfect. And I think that that's really applicable here from what you have just said. There's not really a wrong thing if you are, there's better things than others, but there's not really a wrong thing if your heart is in the right place and you really are present for them.
And lead with that. Lead with that. I'm here for you. I may fumble in my words that I say to you, but you've got to know you mean the world to me, and I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Super powerful. Okay, so we are at 11:41. We're going to try to do around 45 minutes. What I want to finish up with here today is
Jack, you go.
I want to just talk for a few minutes about the workshop on Saturday. So one of the reasons that we were doing this webinar today was to share really good information for those that could be here today. But we also wanted to encourage you, if it's something that would be helpful to you, or maybe someone you know that it might be helpful to pass along, that we are going to be doing a 3-hour expanded version of what you're seeing here in much more depth on Saturday morning, the 10th, from 9 to 12. And just as a little history, last year, Not One More Alabama did an in-person all weekend grief retreat, and Jack and Maggie and another therapist, Emily, were our 3 facilitators for that. And it was really, really life-changing for the people that attended, and they're still connected to us and talking about it. And so we felt really strongly about doing it again, and we had planned on doing the 3-day again, but unfortunately the coronavirus has had to change our plans to do something virtual, and so we've changed it into this other format. So if you want to just speak for maybe, you know, just a couple minutes about what people could expect from this Saturday, and then we'll finish up with me telling them how they could register if they want to.
Yeah.
Have at it, Jack.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. The webinar, it's going to be 3 hours. We're breaking it up into kind of 3 distinct sections. The first part is just going to be, and Maggie used a little word as I like the foreshadowing, unresolved grief. And Maggie's going to be taking a decent amount of kind of the first part. We'll be splitting it up, but just kind of, you know, giving some background on unresolved grief. How does that happen? How does that show up? A lot of it will just be a lot more in depth into kind of the grief process that we go through, right? Really going into grief, loss, a lot of different kind of approaches to understanding those different things, and really also understanding like what grief isn't, which we forget about. You know, a lot of times we just roll it all, you know, the grief burrito, and we just stuff a lot of things. No, you know, grief is a few things, but it's not everything. So, so that'll kind of be the first part. Second part, we're really going to focus specifically on the intersection of substance use and loss. There's a lot of very unique elements of loss and grief that that are unique to substance use and show up in a few other areas, right? But for most part, we're really focusing on that unique intersection. Lastly, we're going to close up with different ways to move forward, right? Unfortunately, we don't get to do the healing part. That's not responsible to do on a Zoom call, right? So we do want to make sure that you feel comfortable and going more into like, what are some steps that I can take? What are some things that I can do moving forward? Whether that's I'm trying to support somebody, I want to find some resources, or I'm somebody struggling with loss right now. I'm afraid of losing, or I have lost. And I'm trying to move forward. So we'll kind of spend the last 45 minutes, and there'll be breaks in there. Don't you worry, it's not 3 hours straight. And we'll try and break it up also with just some kind of activities. So we didn't do too many, but there are going to be some opportunities for you to kind of step in, share a little bit, as much or as little as you're comfortable with. And that'll be it, right? And at the end, I know that the 3 organizations will have just some wonderful resources for you. So if you leave there and you're like, I need to start some work today, there'll be some options and avenues for you to do that. So that's kind of my overview. Maggie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, not at this time, really. Just if there are anything, if there are any specific questions or anything that you may need or want us to address, they may be included in what we're already going to be doing, but we want to make sure we at least give you an answer or something to point you toward. And speaking of that, I noticed there is a question in the Q&A box, and so I wanted to address that if I can, Petty.
Sure.
All right. So I believe it's Kenesha. And so many people have experienced losing loved ones and with their employment and everything like that. And has there been an increase in substance use since the pandemic? The answer to that is exponentially yes. A very high increase in mental health issues and substance use issues. A lot of times they coincide together. And we have seen an increase in death. Yeah. Related to substance use. And Jack, you may have some of the more recent figures on that even more than me.
Right. So the CDC released an article or some new figures. I think it was end of last month. What are we? I think it was like middle of September. So overall, and it's hard, right? I mean, when we're looking at drug trends, if we're actually looking at numbers, it takes a while to really do like good data analysis. But overall, local hospital overdose rates are through the roof, and actually there's now been 3 hospitals in the Northeast area that are reporting more of their ICU beds are filled from overdoses than they are from COVID-19. And so, but yes, yeah, so the primary figures are actually mental health right now with depression and anxiety through the roof, but substance use is trailing right behind those 2. And it is a very normal way for people to cope right now. I know the biggest one that we have hard numbers on is alcohol use. Alcohol
Yes.
use is through the roof. Consumption, the amount that is bought, as well as just use and overdose rates on alcohol right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I know that Kenesha is with WZDX News, and she, I know, is going to do a little story to talk about this topic on their program. So appreciate Kenesha jumping in and being a part of this as well. I do want to let everybody know that if you are interested in being involved with the workshop this weekend, I've put in the chat box a link to how you register, or you can simply go to notonemorealabama.org, click on the events tab at the top of the page, and it'll take you right there to a link where you can register. There is a $25 fee for this. However, we never want finances to be a barrier to anyone seeking help. So if there is any reason that that would create a barrier for you, simply let us know and we will provide a scholarship so that you can be part of the program. So we would love to be able to have more people included. Anybody that's interested, we would love for you to register and be a part of this special program. Summarizing, anything Jack or Maggie you want to add before we sign off here? I know people are here on their lunch breaks and probably have to get back to work, but give you one last minute if there's anything you want to say.
Yeah.
I think
feel like it's all been said, but thank you for the time to all
Yes.
of you for doing this. And I look forward to Saturday. It's going to be psychoeducation, right? It's going to be an opportunity to just learn. Even if you're just here, just wanting to learn more, this is the place to come and do that. So, yeah.
And I think that you can see that Jack and I are both very passionate about what we do. And about, I always say, I love big and I teach big love. And that's what this is about, is learning how to give and receive love more appropriately rather than disbursement of fear. And that is my aim and my goal in this, and the work that I do is to end that fear-based action and reaction. So we look forward to being with you. Anything that you need to answer, let us know and we'll give you an answer. And if we don't know, we'll point you somewhere. And we're honored.
Yep.
Deeply.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
If anybody has any questions after this webinar, feel free to email Not One More Alabama. Simply email us at mail, M-A-I-L, at notonemorealabama.org, all spelled out. We look forward to hopefully seeing some of you on Saturday. And Jack and Maggie, cannot thank you enough. Appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to do this today, and can't wait to see you guys on Saturday. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Bye, you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thank you all.